The Velnorian diplomatic vessel had been docked at the human space station for nearly 3 weeks. Ambassador Kethra had spent most of that time observing these strange creatures called humans. They were odd beings with only 2 arms and soft skin that bruised easily. They laughed too loudly and ate food that smelled strange. But overall, Kethra found them unremarkable. They were just another species in a galaxy full of species. Nothing special, nothing worth writing home about. That opinion changed on the 19th day. Kethra was walking through the main corridor of Unity Station with her aide Vorntel and a young human guide named Kevin Brooks. Kevin was explaining the different sections of the station in a cheerful voice. He pointed to doorways and windows and talked about things like recreation rooms and dining halls. Kethra listened politely, but without much interest. Then a loud alarm began to sound. The noise was sharp and painful to Velnorian ears. Kethra covered the sides of her head with 2 of her 4 arms and looked around in confusion. Humans were running past them now, moving with purpose towards something ahead. "What is happening?" Kethra asked. Kevin's face had gone pale. "Medical emergency. Someone collapsed. We should step aside." But Kethra did not step aside. She had never seen a human medical emergency before. Her diplomatic training had taught her to observe and learn from every situation. So she followed the running humans instead. She wished she had not. A young human man lay on the floor of the corridor. His body was shaking violently in a way that looked deeply wrong. His eyes had rolled back in his head so only the white parts showed. Foam was coming from his mouth. A woman beside him was screaming his name over and over. "Danny! Danny, please! Someone help him!" Then more humans arrived. These ones wore white clothing and moved with calm efficiency despite the chaos around them. The one in front was a woman with brown hair pulled back from her face. She dropped to her knees beside the shaking man and began shouting orders. "He's seizing! How long has he been down? Someone get me the crash cart. Now!" Kethra watched as the humans worked. One of them forced a plastic object into Danny's mouth. Another stabbed a needle into his arm. A third attached wires to his chest that connected to a machine that began making loud beeping sounds. Then the shaking stopped, but so did everything else. The beeping machine made a long, continuous sound. The woman in white looked at a screen, and her face became very serious. "He's in cardiac arrest. Starting compressions." She put her hands on Danny's chest and began pushing down hard. Very hard. Kethra could hear cracking sounds. She later learned those sounds were Danny's ribs breaking under the force of the compressions. "Charge to 200, the woman ordered. Another human handed her 2 metal paddles. The woman placed them on Danny's chest and shouted a word Kethra did not understand. "Clear." Then she pressed a button, and Danny's body jumped off the floor. His back arched. His limbs jerked. It looked like he was being tortured. Kethra felt sick. No response. "Charge to 300. Clear." She did it again. Danny's body convulsed again. The machine still made its terrible continuous sound. Vorntel grabbed Kethra's arm. "Ambassador, we should leave. This is not something we should see." But Kethra could not move. She stood frozen as the humans continued their assault on the dying man. They pumped chemicals into his veins. They forced air into his lungs through a tube. They cracked his ribs with their hands and shocked his body with electricity, over and over again. This went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then something changed. The continuous sound from the machine broke into separate beeps. The woman in white looked at her screen and made a sound of relief. "We have a rhythm. He's back. Get him to the medical bay, now." Danny's eyes fluttered open. He looked confused and weak, but he was alive. The humans lifted him onto a wheeled bed and rushed him away. The woman in white stood up, her face covered in sweat, and began giving more orders to her team. Kethra felt her legs give out beneath her. Kevin caught her before she hit the floor. "Ambassador, are you all right?" "What did I just witness?" Kethra whispered. Her voice was shaking. Her 4 arms were trembling. "What did they do to that man?" Kevin looked confused by the question. "They saved his life." His heart stopped, and they restarted it. "Dr. Monroe is really good at her job. They tortured him, They broke his bones. They shocked him with electricity. That's just CPR and defibrillation. Standard emergency procedure. Kethra stared at Kevin as if he had grown a second head. In Velnorian culture, death was accepted when it came. It was considered a natural part of existence. A transition to be embraced rather than fought. When a Velnorian's heart stopped, their family would gather around them and sing songs of farewell. They would hold hands and let go. They did not break ribs. They did not shock bodies with electricity. They did not fight death as if it were an enemy to be defeated. He was dead, Kethra said slowly. His heart was not beating. He was dead. For about 4 minutes. Yeah, Kevin said casually. But Dr. Monroe brought him back. She saved dozens of people like that. You bring your dead back to life. Kevin scratched his head. I mean, technically he wasn't fully dead. Brain death takes longer. As long as we can get the heart going again in time, there's a chance. Kethra felt the world spinning around her. Everything she thought she knew about humans was changing. These were not unremarkable beings. These were something else entirely. These were creatures who looked at death itself and said no. These were beings who would break bones and burn flesh and poison blood just for a chance to keep someone alive. She thought about the cracking sound of Danny's ribs. She thought about his body jumping from the electricity. She thought about the calm efficiency of the humans as they performed their brutal rituals. I need to return to my quarters, Kethra said weakly. Kevin nodded and helped her stand. As they walked back to the diplomatic section, Kethra's mind was racing. She would need to send a report to her government. She would need to warn the Galactic Council. Humans were not what they appeared to be. They looked soft and weak and fragile. But beneath that soft exterior was something terrifying. A species that refused to accept the natural order. A species that would fight the universe itself to keep its members alive. Kethra had come to Unity Station thinking humans were unremarkable. She now understood that they were anything but. 3 days passed after the incident in the corridor. Kethra spent most of that time in her quarters, trying to process what she had seen. She wrote several drafts of a report to her government, but deleted each one. The words she used never seemed strong enough to describe what the humans had done. On the 4th day, she made a decision that she would later question many times. She requested a tour of the human medical facility. Kevin Brooks arrived at her quarters looking surprised by the request. Vorntel, her aide, looked horrified. Ambassador, are you certain this is wise? Vorntel asked. After what you witnessed, perhaps it would be better to keep your distance from such things. I need to understand, Kethra replied. I cannot write an accurate report without understanding. And the Galactic Council will need to know exactly what humans are capable of. Kevin led them through the station to a section marked with a red symbol that humans use to indicate medical areas. The doors opened into a clean white space filled with strange machines and the smell of chemicals. Humans in white clothing moved between rooms with purpose and focus. Dr. Lisa Monroe met them at the entrance. She was the same woman who had tortured Danny Carter back to life. Up close, she looked tired but kind. Her eyes had small lines around them from years of smiling. It was hard to connect this gentle-looking woman with the brutal actions Kethra had witnessed. Ambassador Kethra, welcome to our medical bay, Lisa said warmly. I understand you have questions about human medicine. I'm happy to answer anything you want to know. Kethra studied the doctor carefully. You saved that man in the corridor. Danny Carter. I did. He's recovering well. He should be back to work within a few weeks. You broke his bones. Lisa nodded without any sign of shame. 3 ribs, yes. They'll heal. The alternative was letting him die. I made the choice I think any doctor would make. Kethra felt Vorntel shift nervously beside her. On our world, we do not make such choices. When death comes, we accept it. Lisa's expression became thoughtful. I understand that different species have different approaches. But for humans, fighting death is in our nature. It's what we do. She gestured for them to follow her deeper into the medical bay. Kethra hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. She had come here to learn. She would learn. The first room they visited contained a human man lying in a bed. His name was Greg Lawson. and he looked very sick. His skin was pale and he had no hair on his head. Tubes connected his arm to a bag of clear liquid that hung from a metal pole. Greg is receiving chemotherapy, Lisa explained. He has cancer, which is a disease where cells in the body grow out of control. The treatment involves introducing chemicals that kill the fast-growing cancer cells. Vorntel made a sound of disbelief. You are poisoning him. In a way, yes. The chemicals are toxic. They make patients very sick. They cause hair loss, nausea, weakness, and many other unpleasant effects. But they also kill the cancer. And if the poison kills the patient before it kills the cancer, Lisa's face became serious. That happens sometimes. It's a risk we take. Greg understood the risks when he agreed to treatment. He decided that the chance of survival was worth the suffering. Greg Lawson looked up at them with tired eyes. I've got kids, he said weakly. 2 little girls. They're 7 and 9. I'll drink whatever poison the doc gives me, if it means I get to see them grow up. Kethra felt something strange in her chest. A tightness that she did not understand. This man was being slowly poisoned by his own doctors. And he accepted it willingly because he wanted to live for his children. They moved to the next room. This one had a large glass window that looked into a smaller space filled with bright lights and machines. Inside, several humans in masks and gowns were gathered around a table where another human lay motionless. This is our surgical theater, Lisa said. We're currently performing an operation on a patient named Amy Torres. She had a blockage in her intestine that was causing severe pain and could have been fatal if left untreated. Kethra looked through the window and immediately wished she had not. The humans had cut Amy Torres open. Her abdomen was spread wide and gloved hands were moving inside her body. Kethra could see organs and blood and things that were never meant to be seen. You are butchering her, Kethra whispered. We are removing the damaged section of her intestine and reconnecting the healthy parts, Lisa corrected gently. When we're done, she'll be able to eat normally again. She'll live a full life. By cutting her apart like an animal. By using the tools and knowledge we have developed over thousands of years to repair what is broken inside her. Vorntel had backed away from the window. His iridescent skin had gone pale gray. How does she survive? Such a violation of her body. Lisa pointed to several machines connected to Amy. We use anesthesia to put her into a deep sleep where she feels no pain. We use machines to breathe for her and monitor her heart. We use sterile techniques and antibiotics to prevent infection. And when we're finished, we use stitches and time to let her body heal. And if something goes wrong, then we do everything we can to fix it. We have lost patients on this table before, but we have saved many more. Kethra turned away from the window. She had seen enough of the surgery. Her mind was struggling to process all of this information. Humans poisoned their sick. They cut open their injured. They broke the bones of their dying, and they did all of this willingly, sometimes even gratefully. Why? Kethra asked finally. Why do you do these terrible things to yourselves? Lisa Monroe looked at her with an expression that seemed almost sad. Because we want to live, Ambassador. More than anything else in the universe, humans want to live, and we will endure almost anything to make that happen. Even torture? If that's what it takes. Lisa paused and looked through the window at the surgery in progress. To you, this looks like butchery. To us, this looks like hope. Every person on that table, every patient receiving chemotherapy, every person whose ribs we break during CPR, they all share the same hope. The hope that they will wake up tomorrow, the hope that they will see their loved ones again, the hope that life will continue. Kethra was silent for a long time. She looked around the medical bay at all the strange machines and chemicals and tools. She thought about her own people, who sang songs when death came and let go without a fight. We find peace in acceptance, she said quietly. You find peace in struggle, Lisa nodded. Maybe that's the difference between us. We've never learned how to accept anything we don't like. We just keep fighting until we win, or until there's nothing left to fight for. Kethra looked at the doctor with new understanding. These humans were not cruel. They were desperate. Desperate to live, desperate to save each other, desperate to hold on to every moment of existence no matter the cost. It was terrifying, but it was also, in a strange way, beautiful. The report that Kethra sent to her government spread through the Galactic Council like fire through dry grass. Within one standard cycle, every major species in the known galaxy had read her detailed account of human medical practices. The response was immediate and intense. Representatives from 17 different species demanded a formal inquiry. The council convened at Harmony Point, a neutral station in the outer reaches of civilized space. Diplomats and scientists and military leaders gathered in a great circular chamber to discuss what many were calling the most disturbing discovery since first contact with humanity. Commander Jake Sullivan represented the human delegation. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders and calm gray eyes. He had been chosen for this task because of his reputation for patience and clear communication. The council hoped he could explain what seemed unexplainable. The chamber was filled with beings of all shapes and sizes. The Valorians sat in their section, their iridescent skin shimmering under the lights. The Malorans floated as clouds of pure energy, their forms constantly shifting. The Korthani stood rigid on their 6 legs, their hard shells clicking with disapproval, and dozens of other species filled the remaining seats, all watching the lone human at the center podium. High Arbiter Zen OK, an ancient being who resembled a tree made of crystal, called the session to order. Commander Sullivan, you have been summoned to explain the practices described in Ambassador Kethra's report. The Council has reviewed the evidence and found it deeply troubling. We wish to understand how humans can justify such treatment of their own kind. Jake nodded respectfully. High Arbiter, I thank the Council for this opportunity. I know that human medicine appears extreme to many species. I hope to provide some context that will help you understand why we do what we do. He activated a holographic display that floated above the podium. Images began to appear, showing human history from its earliest days. For most of our existence as a species, humans had no medicine at all. We lived short, painful lives. The average human died before reaching 30 years of age. We died from infections that entered through small cuts. We died from diseases carried by insects and contaminated water. We died in childbirth, both mothers and babies. We died from injuries that today would be considered minor. The images showed suffering on a scale that made several council members look away. Disease, famine, injury, death. An endless parade of human tragedy stretching back through thousands of years. We watched our children die, Jake continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Imagine holding your child in your arms and watching the life leave their eyes, knowing there is nothing you can do to stop it. Imagine burying child after child because you could not protect them from invisible threats you didn't even understand. The chamber was silent. Even the Melorans, who typically hummed with constant energy, had gone still. We learned to fight death because death gave us no other choice. Every practice that horrifies you today was born from desperation and grief. We developed surgery because people were dying from internal injuries we couldn't treat any other way. We developed chemotherapy because cancer was eating our loved ones alive, and we refused to just watch. We developed CPR and defibrillation because we couldn't accept that a stopped heart meant the end. A Korthani representative raised one clawed appendage. But surely there must be limits. We have heard reports of procedures where you stop a patient's heart completely and then restart it, where you replace organs with machines, where you remove limbs and attach artificial ones. These things seem less like medicine and more like madness. Jake nodded slowly. All true. We do all of those things. And yes, I understand why it seems like madness to you. He changed the display to show images of modern human medical achievements. Heart transplants, prosthetic limbs, cancer survivors, people who had been declared dead and brought back to life. This is what our madness has achieved. Humans now live an average of 80 years or more. Diseases that once killed millions are now prevented by simple vaccines. Injuries that would have meant certain death are now routine to treat. We have taken a species that was fragile and dying and turned it into something that refuses to quit. The Meloran representative spoke, its voice like wind through crystals. You speak of your achievements with pride. But do you not see the cost? The suffering your patients endure? The violation of natural processes? I see it every day, Jake replied. I've sat beside hospital beds and watched people I love fight through treatments that made them wish for death. I've seen the fear in patients' eyes before surgery. I've heard the screams of people as their bodies are forced to heal. I see all of it. He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as he could. And I also see them walk out of the hospital alive. I see them return to their families. I see them celebrate birthdays they never thought they'd have. I see grandparents holding grandchildren who exist only because human medicine refused to give up on them. A Velnorian representative, not Kethra but a senior diplomat named Lord Vethran, stood from his seat. Commander, on our world, we believe that fighting death dishonors the natural cycle. We believe that acceptance brings peace. How do you respond to those who say human medicine is an offense against the universe itself? Jake was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer but no less firm. I respect your beliefs, Lord Vethran. I truly do. Every species must find its own path. But for humans, acceptance was never an option. We are a species born from struggle. Our entire history is a story of fighting against forces larger than ourselves. We fought predators that were stronger than us. We fought climates that should have killed us. We fought each other far too often. And we fight death because that's simply who we are. He straightened his shoulders and looked at the council with quiet pride. You ask how we justify what we do. The answer is simple. We justify it with every person who lives because of it. We justify it with every child who grows up because a doctor refused to let them die. We justify it with every grandmother who sees her family one more time because someone was willing to break her ribs to restart her heart. The chamber remained silent as Jake concluded his testimony. I understand that human medicine looks like torture to many of you. I understand that our methods seem brutal and extreme. But to us, they are acts of love. Every needle, every incision, every broken bone is done with one purpose: to give someone more time with the people they love, more time to experience the universe, more time to live. He stepped back from the podium and bowed his head respectfully. That is all I have to say. The council may judge us as it sees fit. But humans will not apologize for wanting to live. And we will not apologize for helping each other do so. High Arbiter Zen-Ok's crystal branches chimed softly. Thank you, Commander Sullivan. The council will deliberate on your testimony. As Jake returned to his seat, he noticed Ambassador Kethra watching him from across the chamber. Her expression was unreadable, but her forearms were no longer crossed defensively against her chest. Perhaps, he thought, understanding was possible after all. The inquiry was in its third day when everything changed. The council had spent hours debating human medical practices. Some species called for restrictions on human doctors treating non-humans. Others demanded that human medicine be classified as a form of torture and banned from civilized space. A few voices suggested that perhaps the humans had something to teach the galaxy, but those voices were few and quiet. The debate was becoming heated when a commotion erupted in the Velnorian section. An elderly delegate named Sorthon had collapsed in his seat. His fellow Velnorians immediately surrounded him, their forearms reaching out to support his failing body. Soft singing began, the traditional Velnorian death songs that Kethra had described in her report. Ambassador Kethra pushed through the crowd to reach Sorthon's side. She took his hand and felt how cold it had become. His iridescent skin was fading to a dull gray. His breathing was shallow and irregular. His blood flow is failing. A Velnorian physician announced sadly. It is his time. We should prepare for his transition. The singing grew louder. Other species in the chamber watched respectfully, understanding that they were witnessing a Velnorian death ritual. Some bowed their heads. Others simply observed in silence. Then a human voice cut through the singing. I can help him. Dr. Laura Chen stood at the edge of the Velnorian section. She was part of the human delegation's medical staff, brought along in case of any health emergencies among the human representatives. She was a small woman with steady hands and sharp eyes. The singing stopped abruptly. Every Velnorian turned to look at her with expressions ranging from confusion to anger. You would torture him in his final moments? Lord Vethron demanded. Have you no respect for our ways? I have great respect for your ways, Laura replied calmly. But I am also a doctor, and I believe I can save him. Kethra felt Sorthan's hand tighten slightly in her grip. She looked down at his face and saw fear there. Fear of dying. Certainly. But also something else. Something that might have been hope. How? Kethra asked. What would you do to him? Laura stepped closer, her movements slow and non-threatening. From what I can observe, his circulatory system is failing because of a blockage. This is likely caused by a clot in one of his major blood vessels. Among humans, this condition is very treatable. Treatable how? Laura hesitated for only a second. She knew that honesty was the only path forward. Even if that honesty would horrify her audience, I would need to insert a thin tube into one of his blood vessels. I would guide that tube through his circulatory system until it reaches the blockage. Then, I would inflate a small balloon at the end of the tube to push the blockage open and restore blood flow. The Velnorians recoiled. Several made sounds of disgust. Lord Vethron shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. You would violate his body in his final moments. You would turn his death into a spectacle of human brutality. I forbid it. It is not your decision to forbid, Kethra said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. Even Lord Vethron seemed taken aback. Ambassador, surely you cannot be considering this, he said. You wrote the report that brought us all here. You described human medicine as traumatizing. You called their procedures torture. I did, Kethra agreed, and I stand by those words. What humans do to their sick and injured is horrifying beyond measure. She paused and looked down at Sorthan, who was watching her with desperate eyes. But I also saw a man named Danny Carter die in a corridor and come back to life. I saw patients who should have been corpses, walking and talking and laughing with their families. I saw humans refuse to accept death even when death seemed certain. She turned to Sorthan directly. The choice must be yours, old friend. Do you wish to accept your transition? Or do you wish to fight? Sorthan was silent for a long moment. His breathing grew more labored. His skin continued to fade. Everyone in the chamber seemed to be holding their breath. Then, with tremendous effort, Sorthan reached out with one trembling arm and grasped Laura's hand. Do it, he whispered. Save me. The procedure took place right there in the council chamber. A medical team rushed equipment from the human section, while the other species watched in horrified fascination. Laura worked with calm efficiency, explaining each step as she went. She made a small incision in one of Sorthan's smaller blood vessels. The Velnorians flinched at the sight of his blood. She inserted a thin, flexible tube and began guiding it through his body using a screen that showed the inside of his circulatory system. I can see the blockage, Laura announced. It's a large clot in his primary artery. I'm positioning the balloon now. The chamber was completely silent except for the soft beeping of medical equipment. Every eye was fixed on the small screen that showed the interior of Sorthan's body. Inflating now, on the screen, a tiny balloon expanded. The blockage compressed against the walls of the artery. Blood began to flow again, showing as a bright stream on the imaging device. The vessel is clear. I'm deflating the balloon and removing the catheter. Laura worked for another few minutes, closing the incision and checking Sorthan's vital signs. Then she stepped back and looked at her patient. Sorthan's skin was changing. The dull gray was fading, replaced by a soft glow of returning color. His breathing steadied. His eyes, which had been cloudy and unfocused, cleared and locked onto Laura's face. I can feel it, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in hours. I can feel my blood moving again. I feel warm. He sat up slowly, assisted by Kethra and another aide. He looked at his hands, flexing his forearms experimentally. Then he began to weep. I thought I was dying, he said through his tears. I thought I would never see my grandchildren again. I thought my life was over. Laura smiled gently. Your life is not over, Ambassador Sorthon. With some rest and medication, you should make a full recovery. Sorthon reached out and took Laura's hands in all four of his own. You reached inside my body. You violated everything my people believe about the natural order. You did things that should be unforgivable. Laura nodded, accepting his words without defense. And yet here I am, alive, because of what you did. How do I reconcile these things? Well, Laura squeezed his hands gently. I don't know. That's something only you can figure out. All I know is that you asked me to save you. And I did. Whatever comes next is your choice. Sorthon looked around the chamber at the hundreds of representatives watching him with a mixture of horror and wonder. Then he looked back at Laura and laughed. A weak but genuine sound of joy. I think, he said slowly, that I need to reconsider everything I thought I knew. He was not the only one. The formal report to the Galactic Council took 6 months to complete. A joint committee of 17 species reviewed thousands of documents, interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and debated endlessly about how to classify human medicine. In the end, their conclusion was simple but profound. Human medicine was barbaric, horrifying, and incomprehensibly effective. The report changed nothing legally. Humans were free to continue their practices among themselves. But what happened next surprised everyone, including the humans. Within a year of the report's publication, the first non-human patients began arriving at human medical facilities. It started slowly. A Korthani whose shell was cracked in an accident arrived at Unity Station asking if the humans could repair him. He had heard about Sorthon's recovery and wondered if human medicine might work on his species too. The doctors were uncertain but willing to try. They spent weeks studying Korthani biology before performing surgery that sealed the cracks and saved his life. Word spread. A Melloran, whose energy matrix was destabilizing, sought help from human scientists. They developed a containment field that allowed the Melloran to stabilize and continue existing. A species called the Venta, who reproduced through biological splitting, asked humans to help them treat a genetic defect that was causing their offspring to fail before completion. Human geneticists found a solution. Each success brought more patients. Each patient who survived brought more hope. Ambassador Kethra watched all of this from her post at Unity Station. She had chosen to extend her diplomatic assignment, partly because she found humans fascinating, and partly because she wanted to understand their medicine better. She visited the medical bay often, asking questions and observing procedures that no longer horrified her quite as much as they once had. But she never expected to become a patient herself. The condition had been with her since birth, a rare genetic defect that slowly destroyed Velnorian nervous systems. On her homeworld, it was considered simply the will of the universe. Those born with it lived shorter lives and accepted their fate with grace. There was no treatment. There was only acceptance. Kethra had accepted this truth her entire life. She had made peace with dying young. She had prepared herself for the day when her nervous system would fail completely, and she would transition to whatever came next. Then Dr. Lisa Monroe told her it was treatable. They were sitting in Lisa's office, discussing a routine medical scan that all diplomatic personnel underwent annually. Lisa had noticed an abnormality in Kethra's results, and investigated further. What she found changed everything. Your neural pathways are deteriorating, Lisa explained gently. Based on the rate of progression, you probably have less than 5 years before complete system failure. Kethra nodded calmly. Yes, I know. I have known since I was a child. We can fix it. Kethra stared at her. What did you say? We can fix it. The damage to your nervous system is caused by a specific protein that your body produces incorrectly. We've seen similar conditions in humans. There's a surgical procedure that can correct the underlying cause and repair most of the existing damage. For a long moment, Kethra could not speak. She had spent her entire life preparing for death. She had made peace with a shortened existence. She had never once imagined that there might be another option. What would this procedure involve? She finally asked. Lisa's expression became serious. I won't lie to you. It's invasive. We would need to make an incision in your skull to access the affected areas. We would use precision instruments to repair the damaged neural pathways and introduce a corrective treatment that will prevent further deterioration. You would cut into my brain. Yes. Kethra's forearms began to tremble. And you believe I would survive this? Lisa reached across the desk and took one of Kethra's hands. I've performed this procedure over 200 times on human patients. The survival rate is over 95%, and those who survive typically make full recoveries. They go on to live normal, healthy lives. You have never performed it on a Velnorian. No, your biology is different from ours. There would be risks that I can't fully predict. We would spend months studying your specific physiology before even attempting the procedure. But based on what I've seen, I believe we can help you. Kethra pulled her hand back and stood from her chair. She walked to the window of Lisa's office and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there was her homeworld, where her people accepted death as a natural part of existence, where fighting against fate was considered pointless and even dishonorable. I am frightened, she admitted. Lisa stood and joined her at the window. That's completely normal. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you understand what's at stake. How do humans do this? How do you face such things without despair? Lisa thought about the question carefully before answering. We tell ourselves that the fear is temporary. We trust the people who are trying to help us. We hold on to the hope that things will get better. And sometimes we just close our eyes and take a leap of faith. Kethra made a sound that might have been a laugh. That is the most human thing I have ever heard. She turned to face Lisa directly. If I do this, I will be the first Velnorian to undergo human surgery. I will be violating beliefs that my people have held for thousands of years. I will be choosing to fight when my entire culture teaches acceptance. Is that what you want? Kethra was silent for a long time. She thought about Sorthon, who now traveled the galaxy telling everyone about the miracle the humans had performed. She thought about Danny Carter, who had died and lived to work another day. She thought about all the aliens who had come to human medical facilities seeking help they could not find anywhere else. She thought about the life she might have if she chose to fight. The years she might gain. The experiences she might have. The people she might meet, and the things she might learn. Yes, she said finally. It is what I want. 3 months later, Kethra lay on a surgical table at Unity Station. Lisa Monroe stood beside her, explaining the procedure one final time. Medical staff moved around them, preparing instruments and checking monitors. Are you ready? Lisa asked. Kethra's forearms were trembling. Her heart was beating faster than it ever had before. Every instinct told her to get up and walk away, to accept her fate as her ancestors had done for generations. But she thought about all the humans who had lain on tables just like this one, all the humans who had faced their fear and chosen to fight, all the humans who had refused to accept death even when it seemed inevitable. If they could do it, so could she. I am ready, she said. Lisa squeezed her hand gently as the anesthesia began to take effect. I'll see you when you wake up. As consciousness faded, Kethra's last thought was of her people back home. Someday, she would return to them with a message about a species that looked at death and said no, a species that would break bones and cut flesh and poison blood just to give someone a chance at more life. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was human. And now, in some small way, it was also Velnorian. The universe would never be quite the same.